first and foremost, I just want to reiterate that the Accredited Certifiers Association is so active in making sure that content is present, and I'm going to say namely Ellie and Gail, that there was a lot of legwork even into last week looking for, hey, what do we need to make sure general membership is updated on? And so we've come today just on behalf of Jackie, who couldn't be here, and Kelly, who has other things that she's working on as well. I'm going to give just a brief update relating to the organic livestock and poultry standards and what is going on with that now implemented regulation as of January 2025, and just some reminders for membership in case there are some resources you're looking for. So just quick overview of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the effective dates for enforcement, give a very brief overview. Please do not use this as a replacement for understanding of the requirements of what changed under OLPS, and then some reminders that are relevant for you relating to what resources exist under the ACA and what NOP communicated during the annual training in Richmond, Virginia. So as a reminder, implementation was January 2nd, 2025 for any new operation entering the organic supply chain under livestock. And for currently certified poultry producers, there's some specific delays on implementation for a few categories. Keep in mind that new operations effective January 2nd, 2025 needed to already be complying with the new requirements, but existing operations have a couple of years, actually 4 years, to meet some of the requirements. There are existing requirements that they must comply with, but just be aware that operations should already be able to demonstrate compliance with the majority of activities unless they were certified prior to January 2nd, 2025 for these specific areas. An underlying motivation behind OLPS is to resolve inconsistency in the marketplace. So I just really wanted to point out the former Secretary Vilsack communicated that we need to increase consistency. This is a consumer confidence model. And part of the reason it's so critical to just point this out in case there are needs through the ACA is that if you identify inconsistencies through implementation of this new regulation, that's your opportunity to seek consistency across certifying agents so that we can avoid marketplace challenges that existed pre-OLPS. So overview of things that changed. Porches were clarified relating to the standard. Physical alterations, specific requirements exist now on what physical alterations are allowed and what are prohibited. Some definitions were included. Prohibition on induced molting. There are specific and measurable and accountable space requirements for poultry in particular, but all livestock, and clarification about what meets the criteria for access to the outdoors. For livestock, just generally, again, speaking to physical alterations, defining physical alterations so that there's some consistency in what's allowed and how those activities need to be performed. Outdoor access and housing requirements for livestock, kind of cleaning up some of the inconsistencies in enforcement there. And living conditions. Transportation requirements have been added for transportation to slaughter, and that's for both livestock and avian, as well as treatment of illness and management of pain and suffering. And of particular note, I just want to make sure that I point out there are now euthanasia plan requirements, and so that's an important change to the regulation. So this table is something that we created for some trainings, and I'm just offering it here as a resource as sort of a, how do you quickly check and see where changes occurred? So there are 17 new definitions under OLPS. There were no changes to origin of livestock requirements or feed requirements, but there are additional requirements under livestock care and production practices and mammalian and non-avian livestock living conditions. No changes to the pasture practice standard. But there are brand new sections to the regulation, including avian living conditions, transport and slaughter, and there's a severability section that I actually think is unrelated to livestock, but it kind of addresses the regulation as a whole and for enforcement criteria for the federal government. So just something to be aware of. I'm going to take a moment here and just communicate to you that if you are doing certification in livestock, the changes under OLPS are really important to very carefully evaluate in your systems. And the good news is we're going to talk a little bit, you have a little bit more time for proving to NOP that you're meeting that criteria, but it's significant changes, especially if you're doing avian certification and some specific changes relating to management practices at the farm level. Just a table here just to outline for you what the new terms are that have been defined. And to NOP's credit, they did not include soil definition because there was a concern about that soil definition impacting some crop allowance or non-allowance criteria that needed to be sort of debated separately. But there are a lot of definitions that have changed. And if you have personnel that are doing livestock requirements, it's important that they clearly understand these. So we'll talk just a bit about avian living conditions. I have a few slides here just to, kind of give you an overview of different areas. Again, this is not exhaustive. The avian living conditions section is an entirely new section, and there are a lot of subsections to it that I want to make sure that you and your personnel are already looking at. I'm sure that certifying agents have been preparing for this, but because there wasn't a formal working group like there was with Origin of Livestock to dig into specific changes that may be necessary, we just want to make sure you're aware of it and can offer it up in case there are questions and a need for support. So this new section covers year-round poultry living conditions, and there are a lot of specifics that relate to avian living conditions. I'm going to skip over this slide pretty quickly and just put up a table of some summary points that we developed for training and offer it up as sort of a summary. So there are ammonia level requirements for living conditions, and it also includes the frequency with which ammonia levels need to be checked at the farm level. So those are some pretty significant changes. We've provided resources that are in the best practices document. Jackie did a great job of that best practices document, and she's updated it to supply some ammonia tools in case there are questions about what tools exist out there for testing. The lighting requirements, there are very specific requirements around lighting, and one important factor is that use of light cannot be used to induce molting. There's a year-round access requirement, and there's some specific reasons for access that can be used for confinement. Keep in mind that the avian influenza outbreak that we're dealing with is certainly impacting access of operations to putting birds outside throughout the United States. So that is an area where certifiers may want to coordinate to make sure that there's consistency in best practices and that operations are not being subject to potentially problematic requirements. And then specific requirements for exit to the outdoors. There is an exception under that, and I'm just pointing it out here. 21 CFR Part 118 indicates that for operations that have 3,000 or more laying hens, they may establish barriers to animals and wildlife. That's basically to reduce E. coli and salmonella contamination. So it's really important to note that there is an exception to that 1 linear foot per 360 birds. Again, specific requirements for avian operations. So layers of Gallus gallus, that's chickens. That's 6 inches per bird, and all birds must have space to perch except for in aviary housing. So there's criteria for specific housing types, and there are definitions for specific housing types. So it's really important that your reviewers understand the operation and that the auditors have been equipped with this information. When we have outdoor access, they need to have, excuse me, indoor space, they need to have access for scratching and dust bathing for natural behavior. And there is a requirement that if they're using slatted flooring, that they need to have solid flooring for at least 15% to allow for bathing without crowding. And that's for non-mobile housing. Mobile housing, like chicken tractors, have very specifically been outlined in the preamble of the regulation, and NOP has given some specific considerations for that. Porches can be counted in calculation of indoor space only if the birds always have access. So if the birds are ever restricted from porch access, then that porch space cannot be counted in calculation. And square foot requirements are based on production type and species, which we have a resource here just to kind of illustrate that for you. So we did a table just to kind of simplify, because you kind of comb through it and there's a lot of words and things like that. So this table outlines what the outdoor space requirement is based on the type of bird. Let's just assume we're talking Gallus gallus or chicken. And so these are outdoor space required based on if they're a layer, a pullet, or a broiler. Note that these are defined now in the regulation. And I'm going to reiterate, because there's been a trend that I've been hearing with a reduction in livestock auditors throughout the marketplace, and just the increasing challenge of doing livestock inspections. This has been the fastest growing category of organic production in the United States. So this slide is intended just to point out that while this may not be a significant number of your operations, as a certifying agent, having personnel that are equipped to perform certification in these categories will support what is actually the largest growing sector of the organic marketplace. So it's really important not to neglect these requirements. And with that, we're going to talk just briefly about some reminders. So fortunately for all certifying agents, because you're still working so hard on SOE implementation, NOP outlined they are not planning on making a request for information like they did with SOE in 2025. What that means is certifiers should use the extra time to ensure that all systems and processes are updated, that your clients know about the changes in the requirements, and that they're actively working to adapt to those changes if they have some additional time, such as those operations that have until 2029. I want to remind you that Jackie worked with ACA to create this best practices document, which is linked in this presentation, and she is also planning on sending out a reminder email in the coming weeks. And that ACA is doing livestock office hours, and the next livestock office hours meeting is on March 10th. I did a quick screen grab of the QR code, so I'm just going to put that up on the screen. I don't know if it's going to work since it's a little blurry, but hopefully that is functional for you. Oh, great. Jackie said she sent the email yesterday. Thank you. And the final comment is that the ACA works based on the needs of its membership and does a terrific job on that. So I have received some really great questions about organic livestock and poultry standard that I think lend to an opportunity to make sure that there's consistency across the marketplace as some of these really nuanced situations occur. If, as a certifying agent, you identify that this is an area that could be up to interpretation and could be treated differently across certifying agents, I want to encourage you to please reach out to the Accredited Certifiers Association or one of the board members. Certainly, anytime I receive a question, I send an email to the ACA just to make sure that there's consistency and understanding about what issues have been arising. So with that, that is the end of what I have to present today.